Imagine you're a medieval lord. You've just gone to war with your neighbor. You summon your vassal, a knight who swore an oath of loyalty to you, who holds land granted by your family. He's supposed to fight for you. But when he arrives, you discover he's also sworn loyalty to your enemy. He shows up to your camp wearing second-rate armor, fights for exactly 40 days, then announces his obligation is fulfilled and rides home. Meanwhile, he sends his own vassals to fight on the other side. A pragmatic but absurd attempt to honor contradictory obligations. This isn't a failure of feudalism. This is feudalism working as designed. The system was broken from the start. But before we can explain why, we need to untangle what historians even mean by feudalism, because they don't agree. You probably have a rough image of feudalism: kings at the top, knights in the middle, peasants at the bottom, a neat pyramid. That picture is mostly wrong, but it's a useful starting point because the real debate is about what replaces it. Scholars define feudalism in at least three fundamentally different ways. The first comes from the Belgian historian François-Louis Ganshof, writing in the 1950s. His definition is narrow and strictly legal. Feudalism is the system of relationships between lords and vassals centered on the grant of a fief, a piece of land, not a transfer of ownership, in exchange for military service. The word feudalism itself comes from the Latin feudum, meaning fief. Ganshof's definition applies only to the nobility. The second definition comes from Mark Bloch. For Bloch, feudalism wasn't just a legal arrangement among nobles. It was an entire society structured by vertical ties of dependence: lord-vassal, lord-peasant, protector-protected. All of it counted as feudalism. His scope was vastly wider than Ganshof's. The third definition is Marxist: feudalism as a mode of production in which a military elite extracts surplus wealth from the laboring classes below. The focus shifts from personal bonds to economic exploitation. These three definitions aren't minor variations. They examine different people, different relationships, and different time periods. A historian using one framework and a historian using another can study the same century and reach entirely different conclusions. This course uses Ganshof's narrow definition, and here's why. It most closely mirrors the terminology found in actual medieval documents: lords, vassals, fiefs, military obligations. These appear in the sources. Notice what this definition excludes: peasants. Under Ganshof's framework, the relationship between a lord and his serfs isn't feudalism. That's manorialism, a separate system entirely. The broader definitions blur this distinction, which is one reason the term generates so much controversy. We'll work with the narrowest, most defensible version. So let's see what that actually looked like in practice, starting with how these bonds were created. A feudal relationship began with a formal ritual called commendation. The vassal approached bareheaded and unarmed, a deliberate display of vulnerability and submission. He knelt, clasped his hands together, and extended them forward. The lord enclosed the vassal's hands in his own. This physical gesture was the act of homage, the vassal literally placing himself in the lord's hands, declaring himself the lord's man. Then came the second part, the oath of fealty, sworn with one hand on a Bible or holy relic. Together, homage and fealty created the feudal bond. One detail worth remembering: that clasped hands posture later became the standard gesture for Christian prayer. The feudal ceremony shaped how Europeans talked to God. Commendation created a two-way contract, not one-directional domination. The lord owed the vassal two things: maintenance, usually a fief, a grant of land and its revenues, and protection. In return, the vassal owed the lord counsel, meaning advice at the lord's court, and aid, meaning military service. Two features defined this bond. First, it was personal. It existed only between the two individuals who made it. When either party died, the bond dissolved. Second, it was contractual. If one side failed to meet his obligations, the other could legally break the relationship. This was not slavery, it was a deal, and deals can be gamed. Now, everything I just described, a significant number of historians think we shouldn't even be talking about it. In 1974, the American historian Elizabeth Brown published a landmark article called The Tyranny of a Construct. Her argument was devastating. The word feudalism was never used as an abstract noun in the Middle Ages. Medieval people did not call their world feudal. They did not think they lived inside something called feudalism. The term was invented centuries later by scholars and projected backward onto a past that never recognized it. Worse, modern historians use the word to mean completely different things: legal relationships, entire societies, economic systems, without ever agreeing on a shared definition. Brown had a point about how far the word had drifted. During the Iranian hostage crisis in the late 1970s, Western journalists attached the word feudal to Ayatollah Khomeini's regime almost reflexively, as though it explained something about Iran's politics when it explained nothing at all. The word had become a meaningless pejorative. But Brown's critique went deeper than sloppy journalism. She identified real problems in the historical record: lords who granted fiefs without demanding any service in return, service obligations that had nothing to do with military duty, and horizontal bonds between equals, like the town communes reshaping medieval politics, that the feudal model completely ignored. The critics scored real points. But there's a counter-argument worth taking seriously. Lords, vassals, and fiefs did exist across medieval Europe. The pattern of exchanging land for military service appears in enough sources across enough regions to warrant a name. And if historians discarded every imprecise word from their vocabulary, they'd have no vocabulary left. The term is imperfect but useful, as long as we define it carefully and hold to that definition. So whether or not we like the word, the relationships it describes were real, and they had a fatal design flaw. Here is the core problem. Feudalism paid vassals in land, not cash, and once a lord granted a fief, he had almost no way to take it back. If a vassal disobeyed, refused to fight, ignored a summons, sided with an enemy, the lord couldn't simply cut off his income the way a modern employer fires a worker. Land can't be turned off. The only mechanism for reclaiming a fief from a disobedient vassal was war. Expensive, dangerous, and far from guaranteed to succeed. Meanwhile, the vassal sat on the fief, collected its revenues, and waited. The system was structurally tilted toward vassals from the moment of its creation. That structural tilt worsened over centuries thanks to two developments that occurred before the year 1000. The first was the heritability of fiefs. Originally, when a vassal died, the fief reverted to the lord, who could grant it to a new warrior. The system refreshed itself, but vassals pushed back, generation after generation, until fiefs passed automatically to heirs. Sons inherited, then daughters inherited, then minor children who couldn't possibly ride to war inherited. Lords found themselves bound to families who owed military service they were physically incapable of performing. The fief was supposed to be the lord's property, temporarily granted. In practice, it became the vassal's family estate, permanently held. The second development was multiple homage. Nothing in the system prevented a vassal from swearing loyalty to more than one lord and collecting a fief from each. Ambitious vassals figured this out quickly. The result was the exact scenario from our opening: a vassal who owed military service to two lords at war with each other. Lords tried to fix this by inventing liege homage, a special oath designating one lord as the vassal's primary obligation above all others. The vassal's response was elegant and ruthless. They swore liege homage to every lord they served, neutralizing the fix completely. By the High Middle Ages, the erosion accelerated. Vassals demanded geographic restrictions. They wouldn't fight outside their own region. They imposed time caps, 40 days of military service per year, not a day more. Extended campaigns required cash payments from the lord, and then came the final transformation, scutage. The word comes from the Latin scutum, meaning shield, so scutage literally translates to shield money. Instead of fighting, a vassal paid his lord a sum of cash. The lord used that money to hire professional mercenaries. The feudal military bond, right, the entire original point of the system, became a financial transaction. By 1300, feudalism was a system for collecting rent, not raising armies. Step back and look at the full arc. Lords created feudalism to solve a specific problem: how to raise armies in a world with almost no cash economy. Grant land instead of wages, get warriors instead of employees. The logic was sound, but the structure of the deal gave vassals leverage that compounded over centuries. Fiefs became heritable. Loyalties fractured across multiple lords. Service shrank to 40 days, then to a cash payment, then to nothing recognizable as military obligation. A system designed to serve the powerful was gradually captured and hollowed out by the very people it was meant to control. This pattern, institutions subverted by their own participants, recurs throughout history. The death of feudalism's military function mirrors a broader transformation. The High Middle Ages saw the revival of long-distance trade, the growth of towns, and increasing circulation of coined money. A land-based economy was giving way to a money-based one. Every institution in European society felt this pressure: the church, the monarchy, the legal system. Feudal obligations were no exception. Scutage wasn't a quirk of the feudal system. It was the feudal version of a continent-wide shift. The old world ran on land and personal bonds. The new world ran on money and written contracts. Feudalism was caught in that transition, and it did not survive the crossing, which brings us full circle back to the fight over the word itself. The controversy over feudalism is an academic hair-splitting. It's a case study in how the words we choose shape what we're able to see. A historian using Bloch's definition and one using Ganshof's aren't just disagreeing about details. They are looking at different medieval Europes. One sees an entire society. The other sees a specific legal arrangement among nobles. The lesson extends beyond the Middle Ages. Whenever someone uses a word everyone thinks they already understand, democracy, capitalism, freedom, feudalism, ask what they mean by it. The most dangerous words aren't the obscure ones. They're the ones nobody bothers to define.